The number on my phone screen was one I didn't recognize, but I picked up anyway. It was a Tuesday in November, just after 7 in the evening, and my wife had told me she'd be home by 6. "Is this Marcus?" the voice on the other end asked. A man, older, maybe 60, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. "It is," I said. "I live 2 houses down from you. On the left. Gray shutters." I knew the house. I'd waved to him maybe a dozen times of the 4 years we'd lived on Delwood Lane. "Never learned his name. I've been going back and forth about whether to call," he said. "But if it were my house, I'd want to know." I set down the glass I was holding. He didn't give me details. Just told me that over the past few months, he'd noticed a silver sedan parked in front of our house on weekday afternoons, sometimes for an hour, sometimes longer. He'd assumed it was a repair person, a family member, something ordinary. Then last week he'd seen a man he didn't recognize come out of our front door, straighten his jacket in the driveway, and drive away. My wife had stood in the doorway and watched him leave. "I'm not trying to cause trouble," the neighbor said. "I just thought you should know." I thanked him. I hung up. I stood in the kitchen for a long time after that, looking at nothing in particular. My wife's name is Diane. We'd been married 11 years. We had a daughter, Sophie, who was 15 and played travel soccer, and had her mother's stubborn streak and my tendency to go quiet when something was wrong. We had a house with a mortgage we were 7 years into. We had a dog named Biscuit, who slept at the foot of our bed and snored like a freight train. I had believed, a life. I didn't confront Diane that night. I didn't confront her the night after that either. What I did instead was start paying attention in a way I hadn't allowed myself to before. I noticed that her phone was always face down on the counter now. I noticed that she'd started taking her laptop into the bedroom to finish some work emails after dinner. I noticed that she'd begun going to the gym on Wednesday mornings, even though she told me 2 years ago that she hated morning workouts. I wasn't a man who'd been blindsided. Looking back, the signs had been there for months. I just hadn't wanted to read them. 3 weeks after the neighbor's call, on a Thursday afternoon when I was supposed to be at a client meeting that got canceled last minute, I came home to find a silver sedan parked 2 houses down the street, not directly in front of ours. Close enough. I sat in my car around the corner for 40 minutes. Then the front door opened. A man walked out. He was maybe 40, wearing a button-down that wasn't tucked in, carrying a coffee mug from my kitchen. I recognized it. The blue one with the chipped handle that Sophie had painted for me on Father's Day when she was 9. He set the mug on the porch railing like it was his to leave behind, got in the silver car, and drove away. I went inside. Diane was in the kitchen, loading the dishwasher, and she turned around when she heard the door and her face did something complicated before it settled into a smile. "You're home early," she said. "Meeting got canceled," I said. "Oh, that's nice." She turned back to the dishwasher. "I'll start dinner early then." I didn't say anything about the mug on the porch. I walked past her, went upstairs, sat on the edge of the bed, and made a decision. I wasn't going to say a word until I knew everything, and I was going to make sure everything was in order before I did. The next morning, I called a lawyer. His name was Robert Hale, a family attorney my colleague had used 3 years earlier. I didn't tell Diane. I met with him on my lunch break and I laid out the situation plainly and asked him what I needed to know before I said anything to my wife. What he told me changed the order of everything I planned to do. Diane had made a call 6 weeks earlier to a financial planner, one she'd never mentioned to me. She had her own credit card I hadn't known about, 3 years old, with a balance that suggested regular use, and there was a joint investment account we'd opened in 2019 that she had transfer authorization on. Nothing had moved yet, but the infrastructure for moving it was there. I asked Robert what I should do. He told me. I spent the following week doing it. I opened a personal checking account in my name only. I moved my direct deposit. I documented the balances of every joint account we held, with screenshots, dates, and signed printouts from the bank. I made copies of our mortgage documents, our tax returns for the past 5 years, my 401k statements, and the title to both our cars. I put them in a folder in my desk at work. Then, I put a copy of that folder with Robert. Only then did I set up the camera. It was a small device about the size of a deck of cards that sat on the bookshelf in the living room between a picture frame and a ceramic vase that had been there so long neither of us saw it anymore. I bought it with cash at an electronics store 30 miles from our house. I aimed it at the couch, at the coffee table, at the front door. I didn't have to wait long. Sophie had a tournament that Saturday. 3 hours away, Friday night through Sunday afternoon. I always went to her tournaments. This time I told Diane I wasn't feeling well and suggested she go alone and stay at the team hotel, which she did without much protest. I watched them pull out of the driveway from the upstairs window. I drove to my brother's house and stayed the night. I checked the camera feed from my phone twice. Once at midnight, once at 6 in the morning. Nothing on Friday night. Saturday morning was quiet. Saturday afternoon, around 2 o'clock, the silver sedan appeared in the driveway. He was there for 4 hours. I have the footage. I won't describe what it shows in detail. What I will tell you is that there was nothing ambiguous about it. There was no version of events that required interpretation or benefit of the doubt. There was my couch, my living room, my house, and a man who was not me, and my wife, and 4 hours of a marriage ending frame by frame on a 2-inch screen. I went home Sunday evening after Diane had returned and Sophie was upstairs doing homework. Dinner was quiet. After Sophie went to bed, I told Diane I needed to show her something. She sat down at the kitchen table. I placed my phone in front of her and pressed play. I'd already skipped to a section that made the situation clear within about 15 seconds. She watched it, and I watched her watch it, and the expression on her face moved through several stages before landing somewhere I can only describe as calculating. She looked up at me and said, "This isn't what it looks like." I had expected that. I almost admired the reflex of it. "Okay," I said. I picked up my phone and put it in my pocket. She sat back. "Marcus, we can talk about this. Whatever you think you saw, Diane." I kept my voice even. "His name is Patrick. He works in your office building, not at your company, but on the 4th floor of the same building. He drives a 2021 Camry, silver, license plate I've had for 3 weeks. He was here last Tuesday from 2:15 to 5:40, and last Saturday from 2 to 6, and at least 8 other times over the past 4 months based on what I can account for." The calculating look shifted into something else. "How long have you known?" she asked. "Long enough to be ready," I said. She tried several approaches after that. There was a version where she minimized it. It had only been a few months. It meant nothing. She'd end it immediately. There was a version where she reframed it as my fault. I'd been distant. I'd been absent. She'd felt alone. There was a version where she cried, genuine tears that I didn't doubt were real, because you can grieve something you chose to destroy. I sat with all of it. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just waited until she'd exhausted herself. Then I told her I'd already spoken to a lawyer. The color drained out of her face in a way I hadn't seen before. "I'm not ambushing you," I said. "I want you to get your own representation. I want this to be handled properly, but I need you to understand that I've been preparing for this conversation for a while, and I'm not walking into it without knowing where I stand." She asked if there was any chance we could go to counseling. If there was any chance I'd consider working through it. I thought about the Father's Day mug on the porch railing. I thought about the camera footage. I thought about the financial planner she'd called without mentioning it to me. The credit card, the transfer authorization sitting dormant like a plan waiting for the right moment. "No," I said. She slept in the guest room that night. I lay in our bed with Biscuit at my feet and the house very quiet around me, and I did not sleep for a long time. What I hadn't planned for was Sophie. 2 days later, I came home from work to find my daughter sitting at the kitchen table with her hands folded in front of her, waiting. She looked older than 15 in that moment. She looked like someone who had been carrying something for too long and had finally decided to set it down. "Dad," she said, "I need to tell you something." I sat across from her. She'd known for 7 months. She'd come home from school one afternoon and found the silver sedan in the driveway. She'd gone in through the back door, heard voices, understood what was happening without seeing it directly, and left without anyone knowing she'd been there. She'd been carrying it by herself ever since. "I didn't know how to tell you," she said. "I didn't know if it was real. I kept hoping I was wrong." I reached across the table and put my hand over hers. She was trembling slightly. "You're not in trouble," I said. "None of this is on you. Not one single part of it." She asked me if we were getting divorced. I told her the truth, that yes, Probably we were. But that would not change anything about what she could count on from me. I told her that wherever I ended up living, she was the center of that plan, not an afterthought. I told her I was proud of how she'd handled something no kid should have to handle. She cried then, and I let her. And we sat in that kitchen together for a long time. The legal process was not fast. I won't pretend it was. 11 years of marriage doesn't untangle in an afternoon. But Robert was thorough, and because I'd gotten organized before the conversation started, there were no ambushes waiting for me. The joint accounts were documented before a single dollar moved. The asset inventory was complete and time-stamped. When Diane's lawyer tried to characterize certain assets as joint property subject to equal division, Robert had the purchase records, the contribution history, and the account statements to counter every claim. There was one afternoon in a mediator's office when Diane looked across the table at me and said, quietly, "You planned all of this?" "I prepared," I said. "There's a difference." She was right that I'd planned it. She just hadn't expected that I'd started planning before she knew I knew. The final agreement gave me primary physical custody of Sophie, with Diane having regular visitation. It gave me the house in exchange for a cash settlement to Diane calculated against its equity. It divided the retirement accounts according to state law. Sophie would finish her high school years in the same house, in the same school district, with the same team. That had been non-negotiable for me from the beginning. The night after we signed the final papers, I sat on the back porch with a glass of iced tea and biscuit curled at my feet. It was early spring. The yard looked the same as it always had. The maple in the corner that Sophie had climbed since she was 4 was putting out its first leaves. The garden bed along the fence that I'd been meaning to replant for 2 years was still just dirt. Sophie came out and sat in the other chair. She'd just gotten back from practice. "How are you doing?" she asked. She always asks me that now, carefully, the way you ask someone when you actually want to know. "I'm okay," I said. And I meant it in the specific, grounded way that's different from fine. Okay, meaning still here, still standing, nothing permanently broken. She reached over and took one of my French fries from the plate on the table between us, even though she'd told me 10 minutes ago she wasn't hungry. "Jen said the paperwork is done," she said. I looked at her. "How do you know Robert's paralegal's name?" She shrugged. "You've been talking about him for 6 months, Dad." I shook my head. Fair enough. We sat out there until it got dark, and the first fireflies of the season started coming up from the grass, and Biscuit chased 2 of them half-heartedly before giving up and lying back down. The yard was quiet. The house behind us was lit up from the inside the way a house looks when it's lived in, when it belongs to people who are going to be all right. I thought about the neighbor who'd called me on that Tuesday in November. I'd never learned his name. I'd thought about knocking on his door a dozen times since, to say thank you, or just to acknowledge what that phone call had cost him to make. Most people don't make that call. Most people look away, decide it isn't their business, go back inside and close the door. He hadn't. I thought someday I'd bring him something, not to make it a moment, not to make it bigger than it was, just to make sure he knew that the call had mattered. That it had given me time to get ready. That getting ready had changed everything about how the story ended. Sophie fell asleep in the chair beside me. She was still in her soccer cleats, a smear of grass stain on her left knee, her hair falling out of its ponytail. I covered her with the old blanket we kept on the porch and sat there a little while longer in the quiet, and the maple tree held still in the dark, and the house held us both.